Government have said that they are concerned, like we all are, about our future security. So why is food security expendable in Wales and beyond? That's the message from farmer Stella Owen from NFU Cymru, who termed their actions as destructive and threatens the future of family farms across Wales. Mr. Speaker, how many of those family farms is the Minister prepared to see go under before she and the Secretary of State will step up and act in the interests of this key sector to help worried and frankly livid men and women who are worried and fearing for their livelihoods?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I'm sure she has been reminded many times, difficult decisions had to be made to fund our public services, but the changes still leave a significant amount of relief in place. Farming parents will typically be able to pass on up to £3 million to their children without paying any inheritance tax at all, and above this amount, inheritance tax will be paid at a reduced effective rate of up to 20% rather than the standard 40%. Estates have up to 10 years to pay any tax due, and this will be interest-free. These payment terms are not available to others. This is a fair and balanced approach that continues support for family farms, whilst also fixing the public services that we rely on, including farmers.
Jones.
Question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
I have regular discussions with my Welsh Government colleagues about health, and I'm pleased to see clear progress in cancer services in Wales. In December, performance against the 62 day cancer target was the best we've seen since August 2021. But no one should ever be complacent about cancer, and that is why our two governments are absolutely committed to working closely on cancer, to share best practice and to deliver better outcomes for patients across England and Wales.
Clive Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since August 2020, not a single health board in Wales has met their cancer target, leaving patients waiting months for their referral to start treatment. And despite recommendations to properly implement screening programmes, the standard for uptake is not being achieved, leading to poorer health outcomes. As the Department of Health embark on developing a cancer strategy for England, how will the Secretary of State for Wales ensure these issues are not repeated in England?
Well, what I can tell him is that there is now positive progress on waiting lists. Both governments are working together in a spirit of genuine collaboration to cut NHS waiting lists and build an NHS fit for the future. The Welsh Government have committed more than £600 million in extra funding for health and social care in their budget for 25-26, and they're also setting up a National Cancer Leadership Board to improve cancer care. Thanks to these investments, the Welsh NHS services are improving, including on cancer, and waiting lists are falling.
Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my honourable friend outline how she is working in partnership with the Welsh Government to improve cancer and health outcomes? And could she try and help me understand why on earth, in the budget vote last week, the Conservatives and Plaid Cymru voted against £600 million more in our Welsh NHS?
I really cannot explain why the Conservative colleagues in the Senate voted against this budget, because not only is the Welsh Government delivering on £600 million, but they are also delivering a specific package on cancer care. And the initial phase, which is going to focus on breast, skin, gynecological, lower gastrointestinal, neurological cancer, will improve productivity and efficiency in how health boards deliver care. And this includes sending people straight to test without an outpatient appointment. Alongside this, Welsh Government are implementing a wider range of service improvements, from reducing smoking and tackling obesity to HPV vaccination and diagnostic and genomic strategies.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wales has a world-class tourism offer. I fully support the work that Welsh Government is doing to support the tourism sector in Wales through Visit Wales and other initiatives. Last month, the UK Government announced a £15 million investment for Venue Cymru in Llandudno and the Newport Transporter Bridge. These are two key projects that will help boost the tourism and culture sector in Wales.
Thank her for her answer. The tourism and hospitality sector in the UK is one of the most heavily taxed in Europe. Will she press the Chancellor to reduce the tax burden in this area to help drive local economies that rely on tourism in Wales and in constituencies like mine on the Isle of Wight?
I would gently remind the gentleman opposite that his party in government put the highest tax burden in 70 years on the people and businesses of this country, leaving a £22 billion black hole that we have had to try and sort out.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. More than 40 countries and holiday destinations around the world have introduced a form of visitor levy, including Greece, Amsterdam, Barcelona and California. So can the Secretary of State outline the work she is doing with the Welsh Government to support our vital tourism industry?
The honourable member has one of the most beautiful constituencies in Wales, and I know tourism is very critical for his local economy. Indeed, probably tourism remains the only way to see a Conservative MP in Wales after the general election. The visitor levy is set to raise up to £33 million for tourism sector across Wales. Last week, Conservatives in the Senedd voted to block £15.6 million in support for Welsh tourism.
So, Secretary of State, Minister.
Sadly, there will be no more Easter family fun at Oakwood. They've made it clear that their final demise after COVID was Labour's looming tourism tax, job tax and sky-high business rates from the Senedd, meaning it's all over. Mr. Speaker, how many more tourist and hospitality businesses need to tell the UK government that their closed signs will be going up and staying up due to decisions made by the Treasury? Will this Secretary of State stand up for businesses and jobs in Wales who know they are being taken for the worst ride possible, frankly even more vomit-inducing than megaphobia, by this government of broken promises?
Last week, her colleagues in the Senedd voted against extra money for tourism. They did. Now, maybe she should have a conversation with Darren Miller in the Senedd, her colleague, but I don't think they're having that sort of conversation at the moment because they're still arguing about who's leading the Tories in Wales.
Douglas McAllister.
Question number 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I regularly meet with the First Minister to discuss a wide range of matters, including NHS waiting lists. The latest data shows positive progress in reducing long waiting times and the size of the waiting list, thanks to investment by both the UK and Welsh governments.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm appalled to hear that Plaid Cymru voted against £600 million extra investment to bring down NHS waiting lists in Wales. But I'm afraid to say this is a familiar story for us Scottish members. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that nationalist parties will always prioritise niche constitutional distractions over delivering priorities for working families, what they need and what they deserve?
Mr. Speaker, I couldn't agree more with my honourable friends, and Plaid Cymru members are going to have to explain to their constituents why they voted against £600 million extra for the NHS last week, blocking crucial funding, reaching our hospitals, NHS staff and patients in Wales.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, Minister, one of the issues for the waiting lists in Wales, as it is in all of the United Kingdom, are those who have been waiting for diabetes diagnosis, number one, and then the treatment. There used to be in Westminster a strategy that encompassed just not England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Would the Minister support a similar strategy for the 4 regions together to address the issue of diabetes and what it's doing to this country?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Can I just say nations and regions rather than just regions? But I'm very happy to have a discussion with him outside the chamber about that.
Graham Ledbetter.
Question number 7, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Our United Kingdom is going from strength to strength and is underpinned by a transformed relationship between the UK and devolved governments. In Wales, this means a partnership between our two governments, which is delivering on the issues that matter most to people, on reforming the NHS and public services and attracting investment and new jobs through free ports, investment zones and our industrial strategy.
Thank you. Thank the Minister for that answer. Today the Senate will vote on a motion to redesignate HS2 as an England-only project. Previous calculations suggest that Wales missed out on around £4 billion from the project, but Welsh ministers now claim that amount is £431 million. Quite the difference. With the Welsh Government abandoning its ambitions and the UK Government refusing to budge on full consequential funding, is the Labour Party now waving the white flag on Wales missing billions?
Well, the government absolutely acknowledges that the previous Conservative government shortchanged Wales for years on rail investment, including because of HS2. And one of our top priorities is to reverse those years of historic underfunding in Wales, is infrastructure. So the Secretary of State met the Transport Secretary and Welsh Government Transport Minister Ken States immediately before Christmas, where they agreed on a direction of travel which we hope will deliver new investment for rail in Wales. The UK and Welsh governments have agreed a prioritisation of rail improvement projects developed by the Wales Rail Board. This will inform our respective departments' work in the run-up to the spring spending review.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Investment into Wales by the UK government demonstrates the strength of the Union, and I was therefore delighted to see the UK Labour government announce its plan for neighbourhoods that will see £100 million invested in Welsh communities, with £20 million of that going into my constituency of Wrexham, straight into vital local resources like high streets and youth clubs. Will the Secretary of State agree with me that this Labour government is committed to bringing growth to areas of Wales that were previously ignored by the party opposite?
Well, indeed, with UK Government and Welsh Government working together, we've secured more than £1.5 billion investment and hundreds of jobs in Wales. And, of course, we've established those investment in zones in Cardiff, Newport, Wrexham and Flintshire to provide a rocket boost to sector strengths like advanced manufacturing.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Question number 9.
Minister.
UK Government has delivered the biggest budget settlement in the history of devolution, with £21 billion of new money for the Welsh Government. The Welsh Government is investing almost £200 million this year to support school standards across Wales, plus a further almost £170 million next year. But his Welsh Conservative colleagues tried to block this funding by voting against the Welsh Government budget last week.
Go for it. Sir Ashley Fox.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. Children in Wales have the lowest PISA scores in the United Kingdom and are significantly below the OECD average. Does the Minister believe this could be related in any way to 26 years of Labour government in Wales?
Well, I'll take no lectures from the party opposite. The Conservative attack rings absolutely hollow, given the chronic underfunding of education and public services for the last 14 years when they have been in power. Now, the UK and Welsh governments are working together to ensure every young person has the opportunity to succeed, including by investing over £260 million extra in education and more than £260 million for local government to set school budgets in Wales. In spite of the shenanigans of Plaid and the Conservatives voting against the Welsh Government's budget, Labour are getting on and delivering certainty and support for teachers across Wales through increases to education and local authority budgets.
Jill German, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend welcome, as I do, the additional £20 million announced by Welsh Government last week to improve education standards, on top of the £262 million extra in total for education in Wales? And is she as perplexed as I am as to why the Conservatives and Plaid Cymru voted against extra money for education in the Welsh budget?
Well, like her, I'm absolutely astounded the way that the Plaid Cymru and Conservative Senate members voted against the budget. But the important thing is that this year the Welsh Government will be investing an additional £1.1 million for literacy, numeracy and science support in schools. And we've also, the Welsh Government's also announced investment of a £10 million package on literacy and numeracy for the coming year, increasing local capacity to support schools, national support programmes and interventions to support struggling learners.
Right, that completes Welsh questions. We now come to questions to the Prime Minister. Mike Martin.
Question number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the progress in talks between Ukraine and the United States. We must now redouble our efforts to get a lasting, secure peace. Mr. Speaker, on Saturday, I'll convene international leaders to discuss how we can make further progress. Can I also pay tribute to the bravery and dedication of all those responding to the ship collision off the East Yorkshire coast? Our thoughts, and I'm sure of the whole House, are with the family of the crew member who is sadly presumed dead. Mr. Speaker, this week we introduced landmark legislation to get Britain building, paving the way to restoring the dream of home ownership for working people across the country. We're also driving forward our Employment Rights Bill, the biggest boost to workers' rights in a generation. That's our plan for change in action. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Russia has abducted at least 19,000 Ukrainian children and transferred them to Russia. They have been told that their parents don't love them, they've been placed in Russian homes, and they have been re-educated. For this despicable crime and others, the International Criminal Court has issued 6 arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin and his gang. I note the Prime Minister's previous fulsome support for the ICC, and I also note his comments just last night about the support that the UK will offer to Ukraine in achieving a just and lasting peace. Will the Prime Minister confirm to the House that British peacekeeping troops will only be deployed to Ukraine if the peacekeeping deal includes both the return of Ukraine's children and Putin's prosecution?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Speaker, firstly I thank him for raising this issue because it is an absolutely terrible case of abduction and kidnapping. And when we say a lasting, just settlement or peace in Ukraine, it must, of course, involve dealing with this issue, and we are, as he would expect, raising it continually with our allies.
John Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Telford and Britain voted for change in July. Yet this week we saw the bizarre spectacle of the Conservatives attempting to bring back the Rwanda policy, clinging onto a gimmick that cost the British taxpayers £700 million, yet only sent 4 volunteers to Rwanda. As Labour works to secure our borders through our plan for change, does the Prime Minister agree with me? It's quite clear the party opposite have done absolutely nothing.
Well, he's quite right. They ran an open borders experiment that saw numbers go up to almost 1 million. And the leader of the opposition was the cheerleader, thanking herself for the lobbying that she did. The Rwanda scheme, yes, Mr. Speaker, £700 million of taxpayers' money to remove 4 volunteers. What a contrast. We've got the flights off. 19,000 people removed who shouldn't be here. As with the NHS, with prisons, the economy, everything else, we're clearing up the mess that they lost.
Leader of the Opposition Kemi Badenoch.
Later today, the Prime Minister is meeting the family of Sir David Amess. Sir David gave this House and our country 40 years of service. I hope the Prime Minister will agree that getting the response to his murder right is vital, not just to his family, but to our democracy. Mr. Speaker, every week I speak to businesses who are letting go of staff or closing. Has the Prime Minister been given an estimate of how many people will lose their jobs because of his budget?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, just on the question of Sir David, he was a deeply loved and respected colleague, and behind me is the plaque, as is the plaque to Joe Cox in front of me. And I know this was deeply felt by the House, but particularly, as I acknowledged at the time, by the party opposite, who lost a colleague and a friend in the most awful of circumstances. Mr. Speaker, I am meeting the Amess family later on today, and will make sure that they get answers to the questions that they ask. Mr. Speaker, in relation to businesses, I'm really pleased to say we've got thousands of new jobs into the economy. We've got more investment in the last 20 years, an absolute record. Wages are up. higher than prices, 3 interest rate cuts, the best boost for the cost of living for a very long time.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to get out more. Inflation is up, and estimates of job losses are between 130,000 and 300,000. Okay. His tax rises are hurting every sector of the economy. Things are getting worse for nurseries. Nurseries are writing to stressed parents right now, telling them that fees will go up because of his jobs tax. Can he explain how more expensive childcare is good for the economy or for working families struggling to make ends meet?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're putting in childcare. Look at the breakfast clubs, 2 in her constituency. But she's rather forgetting the £22 billion black hole that they left, that we had to deal with. That's why we had to take the necessary but right measures we did in the budget. And what's her response? Not that she'd reverse them. Oh, no, she doesn't say that. She attacks what we've done, but she doesn't say it because she wants all the benefits of our budget in returns of investment, but she doesn't want to pay for it. That's how we got into the mess in the first place.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is out of touch because he should know that nurseries are charging over £2,000 for full-time care. That's £24,000 a year after tax, and he's talking about 60p breakfast clubs. He has no idea what people out there are experiencing, and it is not just the families. Even councils must pay his jobs tax. To cope with it, the average council tax bill is increasing by over £100 in April, after he promised to freeze it. Hard-working families' money is going to the Chancellor instead of social care and fixing potholes. Why should these families pay more for less?
Well, she really shouldn't denigrate what she calls, I think, 60p breakfast clubs. She should be welcoming them. And she asked about council tax, Mr. Speaker. The Tories put up council tax every year for 12 years. Their manifesto, Tory LGA manifesto, government should remove the caps on council tax. And then Hampshire Council, Tory, wanted a 15% increase. We said no. Slough Council, again, Mr. Speaker, Tory, wanted 3%. We said no. Windsor and Maidenhead, Tory, now Lib Dem, wanted 25%. We said no. We're the ones that are doing the right things to get this country on the right track.
Mr. Speaker, the point is he promised to freeze, and they are going up. And if he wants to talk about councils, let's look at Liverpool or maybe Birmingham, where the rubbish is piling up so high, people vote Labour and all they get is trash, just like what he's saying at the dispatch box. People all over the country are suffering, not just in Birmingham. Millions of elderly people have had their winter fuel payments snatched away. At the same time, care home fees are set to go up by a devastating £3,000 because of his jobs tax. How does he expect pensioners on a fixed income to make ends meet?
Mr. Speaker, this is why it's so important that wages are up higher than prices. That's why it's so important that the interest rates are coming down. This is the biggest boost for the cost of living for a very, very long time. What we're doing is picking up and fixing the mess that they left.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is not looking at what is happening out there. Every day I speak to businesses who are telling us that they think that they are going bust. And as if businesses and families didn't have enough to worry about, supermarkets say food prices will increase by over 4% because of the jobs tax. And that's before we get to the immoral family farms tax on the very farmers who work so hard to produce our food. What does the Prime Minister have against farmers anyway? Does he not see that his budget is killing farming in this country, and he is making life so much harder for everyone else?
Mr. Speaker, the budget provided £5 billion for farming over the next 2 years. That is a record amount. We've set out the roadmap for farming, which has been welcomed by farmers. And many thousands of farms have benefited from the farming schemes. But she talks about prices. Wages are going up higher than prices. That's the first in a long time that's happened. So for families across the country, they're better off under Labour.
He's got no answers today. What the farmers are complaining about is the sustainable farming incentive, which he has just scrapped or withdrawn. They are making mistakes with this budget. And that's why in 2 weeks, the Chancellor will come to this House to present an emergency budget the Prime Minister said we would not need. They will try and make out it's because of global events. But the truth is they trash the economy with their bad choices. They said they'd look after pensioners. Then they snatched winter fuel payments. They said that they would be pro-business, but they hiked taxes on jobs. And he, Mr. Speaker, he promised to freeze council tax, but it's going up by £100. This is a high-tax, low-growth, job-killing government. Will he use the emergency budget to fix the mess he's made?
Mr. Speaker, inflation under them 11%, £22 billion black hole, a mini-budget that made us the laughing stock of the world, and they want to give lectures on the economy to us. No, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With 1 in 8 young people across the country not in education, employment or training, people in rugby are worried about a wasted generation. Too many people with disabilities and health conditions are not getting the help that they need to get into work. So will the Prime Minister set out how this government will give everyone who is able to work the support they need, provide compassion to those who can't work, and fix the broken welfare system left behind by, you guessed it, the Conservatives?
I thank him for raising this issue. Mr. Speaker, I come from a family that dealt with disability through my mother and brother over many years, so I do understand the concerns that have been raised by him. But we inherited a system which is broken, it is indefensible economically and morally, and we must and we will reform it. We will have clear principles, Mr. Speaker. We will protect those who need protecting. We will also support those who can work back to work. But Labour is the party of work. We are also the party of equality and fairness.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin by giving a shout-out for Young Carers Action Day today, but I promise the House I will not sing. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has rightly spoken about the need to get more people into work, and he repeated that now, so people have more dignity, we can get the economy going, and we can cut the benefits bill after the disgraceful legacy left by the Conservatives.
You were there for 5 years.
But does the Prime Minister recognise that for many disabled people, the best way to help them into work is to support them properly with more special equipment, with training, with better healthcare and so on? And will he also today calm anxieties that he himself has raised for many of us, that the disability benefits for people who simply cannot work will not be cut?
Mr. Speaker, we will, of course, as I've just said, the principles, we will, of course, support those who need support, but also help those who can work into work. They'll be the guiding principles. But what we've inherited is shocking, and they ought to be silent. 1 in 8 young people not in education, work or training. That is a lost generation. That is their inheritance. They've got plenty to say now. They did nothing for 14 years and left this in terrible inheritance.
And Davey, Mr. Speaker, turning to international issues, can I congratulate the Prime Minister on helping to secure the restoration of US military and intelligence support for Ukraine? But can I press him on progress to persuade President Trump against damaging metal tariffs already hitting British industry? The Prime Minister knows that we on these benches believe he must be more robust with President Trump, like the Europeans and like the Canadians. So will the Prime Minister fly out to Canada as soon as possible to show their new Prime Minister and the Canadian people that Britain stands with its Commonwealth allies against Trump's threats and against Trump's tariffs?
Well, Canada is an ally and a very important ally too, and I've spoken to our allies on many occasions about the situation in Canada. On the question of tariffs, obviously, like everybody else, I'm disappointed to see global tariffs in relation to steel and aluminium. But we will take a pragmatic approach. We are, as he knows, negotiating an economic deal which covers and will include tariffs if we succeed, but we will keep all options on the table.
Claire Hannah.
Hi, Ella Fadra, Conadiv, August, Shock and the Gilga, Fosta, Desh, Con, Changa, August, our culture, Kellaroo, or Fodandone. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody, and happy Irish Language Week as well, an opportunity to use Irish language and culture across the world. It's an increasingly turbulent world, Prime Minister, with relationships and norms turned upside down over recent weeks, and that's why I congratulate the Prime Minister and the Taoiseach for re-establishing warm and firm relationships at their summit last week, and it's reassuring for all of us to know that whatever our constitutional future, that bond is lasting and refreshed. Will the Prime Minister join me in wishing a happy St. Patrick's Day to all who value our shared bonds, and can I take this opportunity to invite him to Belfast in August 2027, which was announced this week as the host of the Fleadh na HÉireann for the first time.
Well, can I join her in wishing everybody celebrating a very happy St. Patrick's Day? Mr. Speaker, she's right. We need a strong and settled relationship between the United Kingdom and Ireland, and the need for that has never been greater, which is why I was delighted to host the Taoiseach in Liverpool last week at our first annual UK-Ireland summit. We've turned the page, started a new era for our relationship with Ireland, and I'd be very happy to go to Belfast in 2027. I want to go much sooner than that.
Andrew Stowe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In just 20 days' time, new sentencing guidance will come into effect that the Justice Secretary has already conceded will be two-tier in its nature. It will mean that the colour of your skin or the religion you have can give you leniency in the eyes of the law and will plunge public confidence in the judiciary into crisis. But it is avoidable. We Conservatives have tabled a bill that, if backed on Friday, can stop this guidance in its tracks. So will the Prime Minister, will he now overrule his Justice Secretary and confirm here and now that he will back this bill, or will he simply step aside and prove he has in fact been two-tier Keir all along?
Well, everyone should be equal before the law. That is why the Lord Chancellor has taken up the issue with the Sentencing Council. But he needs to do his homework, because the proposal that he complains about was drafted in 2024, and the last government was consulted. And when they were consulted, what did they say? They said they welcomed the proposal. Now, Mr. Speaker, I understand that the Shadow Justice Secretary is taking the Sentencing Council to court. Perhaps he should add himself as the second defendant so we can get to the bottom of the ball.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to represent a constituency that has 8 synagogues, a thriving Jewish population, and the UK's largest Jewish cultural centre, JW3. But this week, I was horrified to read reports about rising anti-Semitism on NHS wards, and in particular, a shocking incident in which a Jewish NHS staff member was called a baby killer by their colleague. The NHS that I know and love is open to everyone, regardless of their background. So could I ask the Prime Minister, what is he doing to ensure that my Jewish constituents can safely use our beloved National Health Service?
Well, I thank her for raising these deeply concerning reports. It is completely unacceptable for anyone to experience racism, discrimination or prejudice in the health service. I know my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, takes such reports extremely seriously. It is a fundamental principle that the NHS provides care and treatment for everyone, regardless of race, faith or background. This is a really serious issue. You've let yourself down, you know it. I expect all trusts and healthcare providers to take necessary action against any staff who've expressed views that do not reflect the views and values of the NHS.
Dave Dugan, a closed question.
Question 9, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, he asks about UK-US relations. As he knows and the House knows, I'm committed to strengthening those relations. The US is an indispensable ally. We are working together to try to secure a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. And I've spoken to the President on a number of occasions, including this week.
Dave Dugan.
I agree with the Prime Minister in those sentiments. The ceasefire negotiations this week are a cause for great optimism, and I welcome the efforts that the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, had done in leading that priority. But last week at the dispatch box, the Prime Minister said in answer to my right honourable friend, the member for Aberdeen South, that he had no knowledge of the United States planning to withdraw military aid from Ukraine, yet they did that the following day. It's against that backdrop, because I know the Prime Minister wants a just and lasting peace in Ukraine that respects Ukraine's borders and territorial integrity. When he's impressing that priority upon the President of the United States, what reassurance can he give the House today that the President of the United States is actually listening?
Let me give this reassurance. As soon as that step was taken, I and my team started work to try and ensure that we could get back to a situation of full support for Ukraine. I won't detail everything that was involved over the last week. I can assure him and the House a huge amount of hard work, discussions and diplomacy was used with all of our allies and others to ensure that we could get yesterday to go as well as we hoped it would. I am pleased that we've made progress. I think that's very important for Ukraine, and I'm extremely pleased that support has been put in, backed by the US, for Ukraine. So that's what I did once I understood what had happened. I'm pleased with where we've got to, but as ever, we must go further.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Disabled people in my constituency are frightened. And they're frightened because they're again hearing politicians use the language of tough choices. And they know from bitter experience that when politicians talk about tough choices, it means the easy option of making the poor and vulnerable pay. So instead of cutting benefits for disabled people, wouldn't the moral thing to do, the courageous thing to do, be to make a real tough choice and introduce a wealth tax on the very wealthiest people in our society?
Well, Mr Speaker, the party opposite left a broken welfare system which locks millions out of work. That is in defence, in my view, economically and morally. Of course we need to support people who need support. We need to help those who want to work to get back into work, and I think there's a moral imperative in that. He talks about a wealth tax. We have raised money, the energy profits levy, taxing non-doms and air passenger duty on private jets. But this isn't a bottomless pit, and we must kick-start growth to get the economic stability that we need.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Most people would accept that we need more housing in this country, yet so often it's not accompanied by the necessary infrastructure. In my own constituency, thousands of houses are proposed, yet without the £250 million to upgrade Junction 12 of the M5, the inspector is likely to rule our plan unsound. So will the Prime Minister use his upcoming planning and infrastructure bill to see how developer and landowner contributions can more effectively build this vitally needed infrastructure which would benefit communities up and down the country?
Well, he's right. We have to get the houses built that we need in his constituency and elsewhere, something that the party opposite failed to do. That's why we've introduced the infrastructure bill, which I think he welcomes, and that bill will get Britain building so we can deliver on those 1.5 million new homes through our plan for change. In relation to the particular issue he raises, I know that he and my honourable friend, the member for Stroud, have been working together to try to resolve this issue as I understand it, and I'm happy to ensure he gets a meeting with the relevant minister if that would help in taking it further.
Showdown, Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend this Labour government's landmark reforms to get Britain building through our plan for change? Yes. I look forward to working with ministers to ensure developers deliver on what they promise to local residents, so that new homes also have access to roads, GP surgeries and dentists, and don't create an extra burden on hospitals like the William Harvey Hospital in my Ashford constituency. What is the Prime Minister's message to the blockers standing in the way of the homes and vital infrastructure our country needs?
Well, he's a dedicated campaigner for his constituents. Well, we know who's been standing in the way for the past 14 years. It's the party opposite, and they've learned absolutely nothing. The leader of the opposition claims that she's never opposed growth or development. That's not what she's telling her constituents, Mr. Speaker. Only last month she wrote in her newsletter that she'll keep working with Conservative colleagues to block a vital energy infrastructure project in her own backyard. She's not alone. The Shadow Foreign Secretary, Shadow Defence Secretary, Shadow DEFRA, they're all at it. What a bunch of blockers.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Mr. Speaker, the Employment Rights Bill will grant union equality representatives the right to paid time off work.
Then it does.
Will the Prime Minister grant special constables the right to take unpaid leave to perform their duties?
I'm grateful to him for raising the question of special constables who play a very important role in our communities and keeping us safe. The numbers of special constables dropped under the last government. We support the existing employer-supported policing scheme and will support our special constables, but they dropped under the last government.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Long time.
I recently visited Middlesbrough's James Cook University Hospital and learned of the brilliant work in the neurosciences department for the survivors of stroke, brain and spinal injuries and many others. But it only has 18 rehabilitation beds to serve a population of some 1.4 million people, whereas the guidelines say it needs 80 beds, meaning that patients in the Tees Valley do not get the rehabilitation they need. So will the government remedy the position by ensuring that resources are allocated to meet the ambition to develop a world-class new rehabilitation centre to serve the Tees Valley and beyond?
Well, I thank him for his question. It is important to hear about the important work that James Cook Hospital is doing in his constituency. We are investing £350,000 in research on interventions which support people with functional neurological disorders to rehabilitate them within the community. And of course our plan for change invested £25 billion to cut waiting lists, speed up treatment and shift more care into the community. In relation to the hospital, I'll make sure he gets a meeting with the Minister to see what further can be done.
Sir John Whittington.
Will the Prime Minister look at the case of my constituents, Mr. and Mrs. Adrian Fenton, who returned home from visiting France in their motorhome to discover an illegal immigrant concealed in the bike rack? They reported it immediately to the police, only to receive a fine from the Border Force of £1,500. Will he agree that my constituents ought to be thanked rather than punished? And does he accept that this action will send a message to deter anybody from acting responsibly in the future?
Can I thank him for raising this important case on behalf of his constituents? I've seen some of the details and I am concerned about it, and I do think it's important, as he says, that the Home Office look into it, and therefore we will do so, and I'll make sure that he is updated in relation to that in due course.
It's a doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Veterans in Sefton, one of the many remarkable charities in my constituency, indicate that statistics can only partly measure the price paid by servicemen and women Incidents of broken marriages, suicides, alcoholism, deep depression and homelessness among veterans remain largely unquantified. Given that, will my right honourable friend restate Labour's commitment to providing our veterans the holistic support they need and deserve?
Well, we owe an extraordinary debt to our veterans, Mr. Speaker. We are committed to renewing the nation's contract with those who've served, and that includes the guarantees of homes for heroes for those who have served, dedicated mental and physical healthcare pathways in the NHS, and dedicated to sport to help those leaving service using their skills to find new and fulfilling careers.
Sir Dyke.
Yesterday, with no notice, DEFRA closed SFI applications, leaving thousands of farmers who want to deliver public goods waiting for a year without support. So can the Prime Minister assure British farmers that they won't be left stranded, unable to support environmental and food resilience goals due to lack of government support?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as she knows, the SFI schemes have operated to provide quite considerable support so far. There have been a number of schemes. They've closed in the past, and then a new scheme has been put in place. They were closed in 2022 and 2023 by the party opposite without the 6 weeks' notice. But we do support farmers. We will be putting forward more details at the spending review. But the difference, Mr. Speaker, in this government is we're funding the farmers. They failed to spend the budget.
Sultana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In October 2023, in an interview with LBC, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "I think Israel does have that right," when asked if cutting off power and water to Gaza was appropriate. For 11 days now, Israel has blocked the entry of vital goods and aid into Gaza, subjecting over 2 million people to collective punishment and starvation. Israel's decision to also cut off electricity to a plant supplying drinking water to 500,000 people is yet another blatant violation of international law and further evidence of genocide against the Palestinian people. In light of these facts, does the Prime Minister still maintain that Israel is not committing genocide?
Look, I'm really appalled by Israel blocking aid when it is needed at greater volume and speed than it's ever been needed. Blocking goods and supplies and power entering Gaza risks breaching international humanitarian law, and it shouldn't be happening. And we are doing everything we can to alleviate that situation.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In his extremely important upcoming discussions with other nations about Ukraine, will the Prime Minister focus on the fact that it was standard Russian procedure to take over other countries by having bogus elections and installing puppet governments? And will he therefore impress on other colleagues to be very wary of calls to hold elections in Ukraine during a wartime situation, which could result in the subversion and takeover by Russia of the entire country?
Thank you for raising a really important point, and the track record is there for all to see. On top of that, of course, we in this country did not hold elections when we were at war. That is a perfectly reasonable and normal course of behaviour. And yes, of course, that has to be part of our discussions as we go forward, including the meeting that I'm convening on Saturday.
Lord Houghton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. South Dorset is ready to play its part, making Britain a clean energy superpower. But after 14 years of Conservative failure, there are many untapped opportunities on our doorstep. Green investment opportunities such as Port Wind, Moor Wind and a hydrogen storage hub are all coming down the track. So can the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that the Government will work with the Crown Court on these projects, invest in key infrastructure and ensure that South Dorset's green energy potential is hardwired into our plan for change?
Well, I thank him. He's absolutely right about making Britain a clean energy superpower. We are committing £2.3 billion to support hydrogen projects, and I recognise the huge potential of South Dorset to become home to a storage hub. We're ensuring public and private investment works together, and that's exactly what the Crown Estate Act does, unlocking significant investment, boosting offshore wind and kick-starting economic growth.
Andrew Rosendale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Leader of the Opposition has already mentioned, later today the Prime Minister will meet the family of our dear late colleague, Sir David Amess, who was so brutally murdered at his constituency surgery 3.5 years ago. I plead with the Prime Minister to reverse the decision to deny the family a public inquiry, despite similar inquiries being held into other tragic instances. So, will he please stop this shameful saga and heed the call of the Amess family for a judge-led public inquiry into David's death and the related failure of the Prevent programme from a heartbroken family?
Can I acknowledge just how heartbroken they are? It's difficult to imagine what they've gone through, what they continue to go through. And that's why it's very important that I meet them this afternoon, which I will do, and discuss with them all the questions they want to raise with me. Sir David was a respected and loved a colleague across this House. And as I say, I absolutely understand how his family must feel about the tragic circumstances in which he died and then everything that followed thereafter.
Final question, Chris Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow marks 29 years since 16 children and their teacher were murdered at Dunblane Primary School. In recent weeks, my constituents have raised with me the alarming fact that adverts offering handguns for sale are appearing on technology platforms like Google and YouTube. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that technology companies have an obligation to all of us to do everything proactively possible to prevent illegal advertising of this kind and not rely on a reactive, will remove it when it's reported approach, which is simply not good enough?
The thoughts, I'm sure, of the whole House are with the victims of the Dunblane massacres 29 years after the tragic event. The Online Safety Act will require online services to proactively remove such content from their platforms and prevent it appearing there in the first place. These duties fully take effect from Monday, and then we'll make sure that all companies meet their obligations.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Come to the statement. Minister Daniel Sytner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I'd like to update the House on the sustainable farming incentive. We stand on the edge of an unprecedented global transition for British farming. From leaving the European Union to the challenges of climate change and geopolitical events, we are asking more of farmers than ever before. To continue to produce the food that feeds the nation and protect the environment on which our long-term food security depends. And we are determined to create the conditions for farm businesses to be profitable and succeed. Now, we're proud to have secured £5 billion for farming over 2 years, the largest budget for sustainable food production in our country's history. That's £1.8 billion for customers already in agreements, £1 billion for farmers who are now in SFI agreements, and a further £150 million for farmers in the SFI pilot. And Labour has got that money out of the door and into farmers' pockets. We've invested to bring thousands more farmers into the ELM schemes
which I'm afraid were vastly underspent by the previous government, to make a record number of capital items available for the coming year to help farmers carry out actions under the SFI and countryside stewardship, with £600 million available for productivity, animal health and welfare innovation and other measures to support agricultural productivity, as well as 50 landscape recovery projects across the country. And we've responded directly to calls from the sector to roll out a new higher tier scheme and to increase payment rates so HLS agreement holders, many of them upland farmers, are fairly rewarded for their work. So we now have more than half of all farmers in schemes, 37,000 live SFI agreements, 50,000 farmers in ELM agreements. Under the SFI, 800,000 hectares of arable land being farmed without insecticides, 300,000 hectares of low-impact grassland managed sustainably, and 75,000 kilometres of hedgerows being protected and restored, which is a huge success for nature. And I want to thank all the farmers involved and to reassure them that all existing SFI agreements will be honoured. Farmers will continue to be paid under the terms of their agreement for its duration. If they entered into a 3-year SFI agreement earlier this year, they will be paid until 2028. If they submitted an SFI application but this has not yet started, that will also be honoured, and all farmers who took part in the SFI pilot will be able to apply for an agreement. But the fact is, the high uptake of the scheme means it is now fully subscribed. Now, I'm afraid as a government, we inherited SFI with no spending cap, despite a finite farming budget, and that cannot continue. So we will continue to support farmers to transition to more sustainable farming models, including through the thousands of existing SFI agreements over the coming years and a revamped SFI offer. But this is an opportunity to improve how we do that under a fair and just farming transition. A transition that supports farms to be profitable businesses in their own right, through fairer supply chains, better regulation and greater market access, and that directs public funding in a fair and orderly way towards the priorities we have set out on food, farming and nature. So we will be strategic in how we design our schemes and responsible within the budget we have available. This is about using public money in a way that supports food production, restores nature and respects farmers as the business people they are. SFI can and must work better for all farms and for nature, and I will set out the details of the revised SFI offer following the spending review, including when it will open for applications. We will work closely with the sector to design an improved scheme so they can tell us what works best for their businesses. We'll also put in place strong budgetary controls so that SFI is affordable to the public purse. The revised offer will align with our land use framework to better target SFI actions fairly and effectively, focusing on helping less productive land contribute to our priorities for food, farming and nature. But the underlying problem facing the sector is farmers do not make enough money, and the government is changing that. We announced the members obviously may laugh, but actually businesses do need to make money. They might need to know that. So we announced a new set of policies at NFU conference last month aimed at improving farm profitability, securing our food security and protecting nature. And through our farming roadmap, we're creating the conditions for farmers to run profitable businesses that can withstand future challenges. This decision is about investing in long-term stability. It's about a future where farmers are supported to run profitable businesses, where public money is used in a better way to better restore nature and to secure long-term food security.
Shadow Secretary of State Victoria Atkins.
Well, may I thank the Minister for an advance copy of his statement, which I'm going to pull apart in a moment. May I thank you also, Mr Speaker, for granting the urgent question that forced the Minister to the dispatch box, because they sneaked this statement out last night, presumably hoping nobody would notice. But guess what? The countryside has. Because the question that we are all asking ourselves is, what has this government got against farmers and the countryside? They sneaked this announcement out that they were halting the Sustainable Farming Incentive Scheme immediately. This scheme replaced the EU's Common Agricultural Scheme when we left the EU. We set up this scheme with our Brexit freedoms to establish a farming policy that works for farmers, the environment and food production. Yet Labour pulled the plug without warning last night. This scheme is popular with farmers, and he doesn't have to take my word for it. To quote one, these schemes have the potential to be the most progressive and environmentally responsible schemes of their kind anywhere in the world. Those were the words of the former president of the CLA and father of the honourable member for Mid and South Pembrokeshire, who I'm sure will agree with his father's own analysis. Why then would this city-dwelling government stop such a successful scheme?